Detective Maria Santos had seen her share of horrors in 15 years on the force, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited at 247 Oak Street that cold October night. The dispatch call had come in at 11:47 p.m. Neighbors reporting screaming, breaking glass, and what sounded like a child in distress. As she pulled into the driveway of the modest two-story home, her headlights illuminated a scene that made her blood run cold. The front window was shattered, glittering fragments scattered across the porch like deadly confetti. The screaming had stopped by the time she reached the front door, which hung open on its hinges, swaying slightly in the autumn breeze. Santos drew her weapon and called for backup, though she knew precious seconds could mean the difference between life and death for whoever was inside. The silence that had replaced the chaos was somehow more terrifying than the screams themselves. She stepped carefully through the doorway, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The living room was destroyed, furniture overturned. Family photos smashed on the hardwood floor, their frames twisted and broken. A child's toys were scattered everywhere, colorful blocks, a headless doll, and a small pink bicycle lying on its side. But it was the blood that made her heart race droplets, leading from the living room toward the staircase, creating a crimson trail that disappeared into the shadows above. "Police! Is anyone hurt? I'm here to help." Santos called out her voice echoing through the empty house. The only response was a faint whimpering sound coming from upstairs, so quiet she almost missed it. She followed the blood trail up the creaking stairs, each step seeming to echo like thunder in the oppressive silence. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel, family portraits lining the walls showing happier times, a young father with kind eyes holding a giggling toddler, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. But now those same walls were marred with holes that looked like they'd been punched in rage, and more blood smeared along the white paint. The whimpering grew louder as she approached what appeared to be a child's bedroom. The door was ajar, and Santos could see the soft glow of a nightlight, shaped like a butterfly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She pushed the door open slowly, and what she found inside would be burned into her memory forever. 3-year-old Emma Morrison sat huddled behind her overturned bed, clutching the remains of a stuffed teddy bear that had been torn nearly in half. The little girl's blonde curls were matted with dried tears, and purple bruises covered her tiny arms like finger paintings made of pain. Her pink pajamas were torn and stained, and her blue eyes wide with terror stared at Santos with a look no child should ever have to wear. "Oh, sweetheart," Santos whispered, immediately holstering her weapon and crouching down to appear less threatening. "It's okay now. I'm a police officer, and I'm here to help you. You're safe." But Emma didn't respond. She just clutched her damaged teddy bear tighter and shrank further into the corner, her small body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Santos noticed that the child's bedroom window was also broken, cold night air streaming through the jagged opening. A tree branch scraped against the house outside, creating an eerie scratching sound that seemed to make Emma flinch with each noise. That's when Santos heard a low, barely audible groaning coming from behind her. She spun around to find a man slumped against the bedroom wall in the shadows, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair and the calloused hands of someone who worked with his tools. His clothes were disheveled, and he smelled strongly of alcohol. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" Santos approached cautiously, keeping one eye on Emma and one on the man who she assumed was the child's father. His driver's license, scattered among other contents from his wallet on the floor, identified him as Jake Morrison, age 34. Jake's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Emma?" he mumbled, his speech slurred and confused. "Where's Emma? Is she ... Is she okay?" There was someone in the house. He tried to sit up straighter, but winced in pain, touching the wound on his head with shaking fingers. "The monster," he whispered, his voice filled with genuine terror. "The monster in the shadows ... tried to take her. I tried to stop it, but everything went black." Jake's eyes rolled back, and he slumped against the wall again, semi-conscious. Santos felt her stomach knot as she looked between the injured, intoxicated man and the traumatized child. The scene told a story she'd seen too many times before. A father who'd had too much to drink and taken out his frustrations on his defenseless daughter. The broken windows, the blood, Emma's injuries, and Jake's intoxicated state all painted a clear picture of domestic violence. But something nagged at the back of her mind. In her 15 years of investigating child abuse cases, she'd learned to read the signs, to see through the lies and excuses. Abusive parents typically showed guilt, anger, or cold detachment when caught. Jake Morrison's eyes held something different: genuine confusion and what appeared to be protective terror for his daughter. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their heavy boots thundering up the stairs. As they worked to stabilize Jake and examine Emma's injuries, Santos continued her preliminary investigation of the scene. She documented everything with her camera: the broken furniture, the blood patterns, the damaged windows. But the more she looked, the more questions arose. Why were both the front window and bedroom window broken? Why was there so much destruction throughout the house for what should have been a straightforward case of child abuse? Emma remained completely silent throughout the entire ordeal. She didn't cry when the paramedics gently examined her injuries, didn't speak when they carefully lifted her onto a small stretcher, didn't even acknowledge her father as he was loaded onto a separate ambulance. Her silence was more unsettling than screaming would have been. It spoke of trauma so deep that it had stolen her voice entirely. As Jake was being wheeled out on the stretcher, he managed to grab Santos's sleeve with a bloody hand. "Please," he whispered, his eyes desperate and pleading. "Please take care of my little angel. She's all I have left in this world. I could never hurt her. You have to believe me. Something happened tonight, but I can't remember. There was someone else here." Santos looked into his eyes and saw something that troubled her deeply: the desperate love of a father who would die to protect his child. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Emma's injuries were real. With a heavy heart, she nodded to the CHU officers to take Jake Morrison into custody for child abuse, while Emma was rushed to Children's Hospital for treatment and evaluation. As the ambulances drove away into the night, their red and blue lights fading into the darkness, Detective Santos stood alone in the destroyed house, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been a home filled with love and laughter. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye, but the evidence spoke louder than her instincts. Little did she know that this case would challenge everything she thought she knew about truth, justice, and the lengths a father would go to protect his child. The nightmare had only just begun, and Emma's silence would become the key that either locked away an innocent man or freed a guilty one. The truth, like Emma's voice, remained buried beneath layers of trauma and confusion, waiting for the right moment to finally surface. 3 weeks after that horrific night, Detective Maria Santos sat in the observation room of the Children's Crisis Center, watching through the one-way mirror as Dr. Rachel Kim attempted yet another session with Emma Morrison. The little girl sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor, surrounded by an array of colorful toys, art supplies, and therapeutic games that had been carefully selected to help traumatized children express themselves. But Emma remained as silent as a stone, her blue eyes vacant and distant, as if she had retreated so far into herself that she might never find her way back. Dr. Kim, a child psychologist with 20 years of experience, had tried everything in her considerable arsenal: play therapy, art therapy, music therapy, even bringing in therapy animals, nothing had broken through Emma's protective shell of silence. The child would occasionally pick up a crayon or touch a toy, but she never spoke, never made eye contact, and never showed any reaction when her father's name was mentioned, except for a barely perceptible trembling that started in her hands and spread through her entire tiny frame. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Kim said gently, her voice warm and patient, despite the frustration that Santos could see in her eyes. "I brought you something special today." She opened a soft cloth bag and pulled out a new stuffed elephant with kind eyes and floppy ears. "His name is Peanut, and he's very good at keeping secrets. Sometimes it helps to whisper secrets to Peanut when we can't say them out loud." Emma looked at the elephant with mild interest, but made no move to take it. Instead, she returned to her current activity, methodically arranging blocks in a specific pattern that she'd been working on for days. The pattern seemed random to Santos, but Dr. Kim had mentioned that repetitive behaviors were common in children dealing with severe trauma. It was Emma's way of creating order in a world that had suddenly become chaotic and dangerous. Santos shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her coffee growing cold as she watched the heartbreaking scene unfold. Her partner, Canine Officer Bruno, a golden retriever specially trained in victim assistance, lay quietly beside her. Bruno had an unusual gift for connecting with traumatized victims, especially children, and Santos had hoped that his gentle presence might help Emma feel safe enough to communicate. But even Bruno's magic touch had failed to reach the traumatized little girl. The detective's phone buzzed with a text from the district attorney's office. "Need Emma's testimony ASAP. Trial date moved up to next month." Without her statement, the case falls apart. Santos deleted the message with more force than necessary. She understood the legal pressures, but rushing a traumatized 3-year-old wasn't going to help anyone, least of all Emma. Through the glass, Dr. Kim tried a different approach. "Emma, sweetheart, I know you miss your daddy. It's okay to miss him, even when we feel scared or confused." At the mention of her father, Emma's careful block arrangement collapsed as her hands began to shake violently. She pushed the blocks away and curled into a tight ball, rocking back and forth with her arms wrapped around her knees. "It's okay, honey. You're safe here. No one can hurt you," Dr. Kim soothed, but she didn't approach the child. Experience had taught her that physical comfort, no matter how well-intentioned, could sometimes trigger more trauma in children who had been hurt by the adults they trusted most. Santos had visited Jake Morrison at the county jail twice since his arrest. Both times, he had begged her to tell him how Emma was doing, his eyes filling with tears when she couldn't provide reassuring answers. "She's my whole world," he had said, his voice breaking. "Ever since her mother died in that car accident 2 years ago, it's just been Emma and me against the world. I would rather die than let anyone hurt her. Please, detective, you have to believe me. I can't remember what happened that night, but I know in my heart that I would never harm my little girl." The medical evidence, however, painted a different story. Emma had suffered 3 cracked ribs, severe bruising on her arms and torso, and what appeared to be grip marks on her shoulders. The emergency room doctor had been unequivocal in his assessment. These were injuries consistent with violent shaking and physical abuse. Combined with Jake's blood alcohol level of 0.18 that night, more than twice the legal limit, the case seemed straightforward to everyone except Santos. But there were details that bothered her, details that didn't fit the typical pattern of family violence. The broken windows, for instance. In domestic abuse cases, the violence usually stayed inside the home. Why would Jake break his own windows? And the level of destruction throughout the house seemed excessive for a single incident between a father and his 3-year-old daughter. She had also discovered that Jake had been attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings regularly for the past 6 months ever since losing his construction job. His sponsor, an elderly man named Frank Martinez, swore that Jake had been making real progress and had been sober for 43 days before the incident. "That boy loves his daughter more than life itself," Frank had told Santos. "He's been working double shifts at the warehouse to keep their house, going to meetings every night, and still finding time to read Emma bedtime stories. Something doesn't add up about this whole situation." The neighborhood canvass had yielded conflicting information. Some neighbors described Jake as a devoted single father who could often be seen pushing Emma on her swing set in the backyard or helping her ride her bicycle on the sidewalk. Mentioned occasional loud arguments coming from the house, though they admitted they had never actually seen Jake behave aggressively toward his daughter. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived next door, had provided perhaps the most puzzling piece of information. During her initial interview, she had mentioned seeing someone in dark clothing near the Morrison house earlier that evening. But when Santos had followed up with more detailed questions, Mrs. Henderson had become flustered and claimed she might have been mistaken, that her eyesight wasn't what it used to be. Back in the observation room, Dr. Kim was trying yet another approach with Emma. She had brought out a dollhouse and was gently moving the figures around, narrating simple family scenarios. "Here's the daddy doll, and here's the little girl doll. They live in this house together, and daddy takes care of the little girl. Sometimes daddies and little girls play together, and sometimes they have quiet time." For the first time in weeks, Emma showed a flicker of interest. She crawled closer to the dollhouse, her small fingers reaching tentatively toward the father figure. But just as she was about to touch it, her hand jerked back as if the doll had burned her. She scrambled backward across the room until she hit the wall, then pressed herself against it, her breathing rapid and shallow. "It's okay, Emma. The dolls can't hurt you. They're just toys," Dr. Kim said softly, but Emma had retreated back into herself, her brief moment of engagement extinguished like a candle in the wind. Santos felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same feeling she got whenever a case involved children. She had joined the police force to protect the innocent, but sometimes it felt like she was failing the most vulnerable victims of all. Emma's silence wasn't just heartbreaking. It was also the key to everything. Without her testimony, they couldn't know for certain what had happened in that house. Was Jake Morrison a monster who had traumatized his daughter into silence? Or was he a victim of circumstances beyond his control? The detective's radio crackled to life. "Detective Santos, please respond to 1247 Elm Street. We have another break-in, possibly connected to your Morrison case." Santos's pulse quickened. Another break-in? She grabbed her jacket and motioned for Bruno to follow her, but not before taking one last look through the observation window. Emma had returned to her blocks, once again creating that same mysterious pattern. But this time, Santos noticed something she had missed before. The pattern wasn't random at all. It looked almost like a floor plan, with specific blocks representing rooms and doorways. And in the center of the pattern, Emma had placed a small toy police car. As Santos hurried toward her vehicle, she couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was trying to tell them something important. The question was whether they would figure out what she was trying to say before it was too late for both Emma and her father. The truth was locked away inside a 3-year-old's traumatized mind, and time was running out to find the key that would set it free. District Attorney Amanda Chun stood before the massive evidence board in her office, studying crime scene photographs that told a story of violence and betrayal. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the images. Emma Morrison's bruised body, the destroyed living room, Jake Morrison slumped against the bedroom wall with blood on his forehead. At 38, Sean had prosecuted hundreds of cases, but child abuse cases still made her stomach churn. This one, however, seemed particularly clear-cut until she started digging deeper into the details. The medical evidence is overwhelming. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the chief medical examiner, explained as she pointed to X-rays displayed on the light board. 3 fractured ribs, severe contusions across the torso and arms, and what appear to be grip marks on both shoulders. The injury pattern is consistent with violent shaking, the kind we see in cases of extreme physical abuse. The child is lucky to be alive, Sean nodded grimly, making notes on her legal pad. The medical evidence alone would be enough to convince most juries, but she preferred cases where every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. What about the timeline? Could these injuries have been sustained earlier and gone unnoticed? Absolutely not, Dr. Reeves replied firmly. Based on the bruising patterns and the healing stage of the fractures, these injuries occurred within hours of when the child was found. The person who did this used significant force enough to break ribs on a 3-year-old. That takes deliberate, sustained violence. The prosecution team had assembled a mountain of evidence against Jake Morrison. His blood alcohol level that night had been 0.18, indicating severe intoxication. A 911 call, while initially seeming to support his story about an intruder, could easily be explained as a desperate attempt to create an alibi after realizing the severity of Emma's injuries. His fingerprints were on the broken glass from the living room window, and there were no signs of forced entry from outside. Chun's assistant district attorney, Mark Rodriguez, spread out witness statements across the conference table. The neighbors paint a picture of escalating problems, he explained. Mrs. Patterson from across the street says she heard loud arguments coming from the Morrison house at least twice a week for the past month. The Hendersons next door reported the sound of breaking glass on 3 separate occasions, though they never called police. What about character witnesses? Chun asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Mixed bag, Rodriguez admitted. His IAA sponsor swears Morrison was committed to sobriety, claims he hadn't had a drink in 43 days before the incident. Several coworkers describe him as a devoted father who worked overtime to support Emma after his wife died. But his ex-sister-in-law, Sarah Morrison, his late wife's sister, tells a different story. Sean raised an eyebrow. Go on. According to Sarah, Jake had a drinking problem even before his wife's death, and it got worse after the accident. She says Emma's mother, Linda, had confided her concerns about Jake's temper when he'd been drinking. Sarah claims Linda was planning to discuss custody arrangements before she died in that car crash 2 years ago. The district attorney felt the familiar satisfaction of pieces falling into place. A grieving widower, overwhelmed by single parenthood, turning to alcohol to cope with his loss. The stress of unemployment, mounting bills, and caring for an energetic 3-year-old alone. It was a tragic but predictable path to violence. But then Rodriguez presented information that made Chun pause. There's something else, he said, his voice uncertain. Detective Santos asked us to look into recent break-ins in the neighborhood. Turns out there have been 3 similar incidents in the past 6 weeks, all within a 4-block radius of the Morrison house. Chun frowned. Similar how? All involved broken windows as entry points, all targeted houses that appeared empty, and all occurred late at night. In 2 cases, the homeowners reported seeing a tall figure in dark clothing fleeing the scene. The perpetrator seemed to know which houses would be vacant in one case. The family was attending a wedding. In another, they were visiting relatives out of state. You think Morrison's case is connected to these break-ins? Chun asked, though she could already see where this line of thinking led. It's possible, Rodriguez admitted reluctantly. The timeline fits. If Morrison was telling the truth about an intruder, it would explain the broken windows, the level of destruction, and why he seemed genuinely confused about what happened. His head injury could have caused memory loss. Chun walked to the window, overlooking the courthouse square, where protesters had begun gathering with signs reading, "Justice for Emma, and protect our children. The media attention was intense, and the public was demanding swift justice for the traumatized little girl. The last thing Chun needed was reasonable doubt creeping into what should have been a straightforward case. "What does Detective Santos think?" she asked. Rodriguez consulted his notes. "She's torn. Says Morrison's behavior doesn't match typical abuser patterns, but the physical evidence is undeniable. She's requested permission to investigate the break-in connection more thoroughly." Chun turned back to the evidence board, studying crime. Seen photos with fresh eyes. If Jake Morrison was innocent, it meant the real perpetrator was still out there, possibly targeting other families. But if Morrison was guilty, and they wasted time chasing phantom intruders, a child abuser might escape justice on a technicality. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Detective Santos. "Chun, I'm at another break-in scene." Santos's voice was tense. 1247 Elm Street, 6 blocks from the Morrison house. Same broken window, house ransacked, but here's the thing. The family came home early and surprised the intruder. The father, David Kim, fought with someone and managed to grab this before the guy escaped. Grabbed what? Chun asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. A piece of dark fabric that looks like it came from a security guard's uniform. And Mrs. Kim says the intruder knew the layout of their house, moved around like he'd been there before. "Chun, I think we need to seriously consider that Morrison might be telling the truth." Chun felt her carefully constructed case beginning to wobble. Even if there was an intruder, that doesn't explain Emma's injuries. Morrison was drunk. There was a struggle. Maybe he injured her trying to protect her, or maybe he hurt her in. His confusion and the intruder story is a convenient cover. "Maybe," Santos replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "But there's something else. I've been reviewing Morrison's financial records. He's broke, Chun. Lost his construction job 6 months ago. Behind on mortgage payments. Car repossessed last month. But here's the weird part. He never tried to claim insurance money for the damage to his house. If he staged this whole thing, wouldn't he want to collect on the property damage?" Chun rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. "What about Emma? Any progress with her testimony?" "Dr. Kim says she's showing signs of selective mutism related to trauma. She won't speak about that night, but she started playing with dolls in ways that suggest she's trying to process what happened. The problem is, 3-year-olds aren't reliable witnesses under the best circumstances, and Emma's psychological state makes her testimony practically worthless in court." After hanging up, Sean stared at the evidence board again, this time noticing details that troubled her. The blood spatter patterns in the living room suggested a struggle between 2 adults, not an adult attacking a child. The furniture wasn't just overturned. It was positioned as if people had been fighting around it, using chairs and tables as barriers. Her instincts as a prosecutor warred with her obligations to seek justice. The evidence against Morrison was strong enough to secure a conviction, but was it strong enough to convince her of his guilt beyond her own reasonable doubt? Rodriguez appeared in her doorway. "The defense attorney is here to discuss a plea bargain," he announced. Chun nodded slowly. "Send him in. But Mark, I want you to quietly reach out to Detective Santos. Tell her she has 48 hours to investigate this break-in connection. If she can't find concrete evidence of Morrison's innocence by then, we proceed with the original case." As Rodriguez left to fetch the defense attorney, Chun took one last look at the photograph of Emma Morrison, a little girl whose silence held the key to everything, but whose voice had been stolen by whatever horror she had witnessed that night. Whether Jake Morrison was a monster or a victim, Emma remained the most important person in this entire case, and Chun was determined to see that justice was served. The question was, justice for whom? Defense attorney Michael Torres had built his reputation on impossible cases. But as he sat in the cramped consultation room at County Jail facing Jake Morrison, he wondered if this might be the one that finally broke his winning streak. His client looked like a broken man, unshaven, hollow-eyed, and trembling with the kind of desperation that came from being separated from everything that mattered in the world. "They won't tell me how Emma's doing," Jake whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "It's been 3 weeks, and no one will tell me if she's eating, if she's sleeping, if she's asking for me. She used to have nightmares after her mother died, and I was the only one who could calm her down. What if she's scared and I'm not there?" Torres had seen many guilty clients over the years, and they typically fell into predictable patterns: denial, anger, bargaining, or cold acceptance. Jake Morrison fit none of these categories. His anguish seemed focused entirely on his daughter's well-being, with barely a thought for his own dire circumstances. It was either the performance of a master, manipulator, or the genuine grief of an innocent father. "Jake, I need you to focus," Torres said gently. "I've been reviewing your case files, and I think we might have found something that could help. Tell me again about the weeks leading up to that night. Had you noticed anything unusual in the neighborhood? Any strangers hanging around the cars you didn't recognize?" Jake rubbed his temples, concentrating hard. "There was something... Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing someone near our house a few times. She thought it might be a new meter reader or something, but it bothered her because he always came at night. And Emma, she'd been having bad dreams again, saying there was a shadow man watching our house." Torres made careful notes. Children's fears were often dismissed as imagination, but sometimes they noticed things adults missed. "What else do you remember about that evening?" "I'd been to a meeting," Jake said, his voice growing stronger as he focused on concrete details. "Came home around 9:30. Emma was already in bed. Mrs. Garcia from down the street had been watching her. She's the one who usually babysits when I have meetings. Emma seemed fine when I checked on her, but she asked me to check all the windows and doors before I went to bed." "That's unusual?" "She'd been asking me to do that for about 2 weeks. I thought it was just leftover anxiety from her mother's death. But now..." Jake's voice trailed off as he struggled with painful memories. Torres pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "Jake, I hired a private investigator to look into those break-ins Detective Santos mentioned. What we found is remarkable." He spread out photographs and police reports across the metal table. 5 break-ins in your neighborhood over the past 2 months, all following the same pattern. The perpetrator seems to know when houses will be empty: vacation schedules, work shifts, social events. Jake leaned forward, studying the documents with growing interest. How could someone know all that? That's the million-dollar question. But here's what's really interesting. In 3 of these cases, the homeowners reported seeing a figure in what looked like a security uniform or similar dark clothing. Professional, confident, someone who belonged in the neighborhood. Torres opened another file, this one containing medical records. "I also had a neurologist review your hospital records from that construction accident 6 months ago. Dr. Elizabeth Walsh says your head injury was more severe than initially diagnosed. You suffered what's called a diffuse axonal injury. It can cause memory problems, confusion, and something called state-dependent learning disruption." "What does that mean?" Jake asked, though he looked like he was afraid to hope. "It means that during times of extreme stress or trauma, your brain might not form proper memories of events. The alcohol in your system that night would have made this effect much worse. If someone attacked you and Emma, your brain might literally be unable to recall the details, even though you were conscious during the attack for the first time." Since his arrest, Jake's eyes showed a flicker of something other than despair. "You think someone really was in our house that night?" "I think it's possible," Torres replied carefully. "But Jake, even if we prove there was an intruder, We still have to explain Emma's injuries. The prosecution will argue that you hurt her during the struggle, either accidentally or because you were confused and frightened. Jake's face crumpled. I would never hurt Emma. Never. Even if I couldn't remember, my body would remember. Father doesn't forget how to protect his child. Torres was interrupted by a knock on the consultation room door. A guard peered in and announced, "Your investigator is here with an urgent update." Private investigator Sarah Chun, no relation to the district attorney, was a former police detective who specialized in cases involving missing persons and home invasions. She entered the room with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Michael, you need to see this," she said without preamble, setting a laptop on the table. "I've been reviewing security footage from businesses near all the break-in locations. Most cameras don't cover residential areas, but I found something at the gas station 3 blocks from the Morrison house." The footage was grainy and time-stamped. 11:15 p.m. on the night of Jake's arrest. It showed a tall figure in dark clothing walking quickly past the camera, moving in the direction of Jake's neighborhood. The person wore what appeared to be a security guard's uniform and carried what looked like a small bag of tools. "Can we identify him?" Torres asked, studying the screen intently. "Not from this footage, but I found something else," Sarah replied, pulling up another file. "I contacted the private security companies that work in that area. Turns out there are 3 firms that provide residential patrol services in Jake's neighborhood. 2 of them provided employee schedules and confirmed none of their guards were working that area that night. What about the 3rd company?" Sarah's smile was grim. "That's where it gets interesting. Secure Home Solutions initially refused to cooperate, claiming client confidentiality. But when I pressed them, they admitted that one of their employees had been terminated 2 weeks before the Morrison incident for inappropriate conduct during residential checks." Torres felt his pulse quicken. "Do we have a name?" "Rip Patterson. Age 34, 5 years with the company. His termination report indicates he was caught using client access codes to enter homes when families weren't present. The company suspected theft, but couldn't prove it, so they just fired him without pressing charges." Jake stared at the screen, his hands trembling. "That could be him. That could be the person who hurt Emma." "There's more," Sarah continued. "Patterson's ex-girlfriend filed a restraining order against him last year. She claimed he had an obsession with protecting children from their unfit parents. The case was dropped when she moved out of state, but the psychological evaluation ordered by the court described Patterson as having boundary issues and an unhealthy fixation on family dynamics." Torres felt the pieces of a new narrative clicking into place. A security guard with access to neighborhood patrol routes, knowledge of family schedules, and a psychological compulsion involving children. Where is Patterson now? "That's the problem," Sarah admitted. "He disappeared right after his termination. No forwarding address, no employment records, nothing. It's like he vanished." Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "He was watching us. Emma was right about the shadow man. He was watching us, and I didn't protect her." Torres closed his laptop and gathered the files. "Jake, I want you to understand something. This evidence creates reasonable doubt, but it doesn't guarantee acquittal. The prosecution still has Emma's injuries, your blood alcohol level, and your presence at the scene. We're going to need more than speculation about a phantom security guard to convince a jury." "What about Emma?" Jake asked desperately. If she could tell them what really happened. "Dr. Kim says Emma is showing some progress, but she's still not speaking about that night. And Jake, even if she does start talking, 3-year-olds don't make reliable witnesses. Their memories can be influenced by suggestion, and the trauma has probably affected her recollection." As Torres prepared to leave, Jake grabbed his arm. "Please, you have to find this Patterson guy. You have to prove I didn't hurt my little girl. She's all I have left, and if people think I'm a monster who would hurt her ... double quotes. His voice broke completely. Torres nodded grimly. The case had just taken a dramatic turn, but they were far from victory. Finding Rick Patterson would be like searching for a ghost, and even if they found him, proving his involvement in Emma's injuries would be nearly impossible without the child's testimony. As he walked toward his car, Torres couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The trial was approaching rapidly, and somewhere out there, a dangerous man was still free, while an innocent father sat in jail, separated from the daughter who needed him most. The shadow man was real, but catching shadows required more than evidence. It required a miracle. The courthouse steps buzzed with activity as jury selection began for what the media had dubbed the Silent Angel case. Television vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray October sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Reporter Amanda Walsh adjusted her earpiece as she prepared for her live broadcast, the iconic courthouse dome providing a dramatic backdrop. This is Amanda Walsh reporting from the county courthouse, where jury selection begins today in the case of Jake Morrison, the father accused of brutally abusing his 3-year-old daughter Emma, the child who has remained silent since then. Night of the alleged attack has become a symbol of innocence lost. But defense attorney Michael Torres claims his client is innocent, framed by a phantom intruder who has never been found. Inside the courthouse, District Attorney Amanda Shun reviewed her opening statement one final time. The pressure was immense, not just from the media attention, but from her own conscience. The Rick Patterson lead had created uncomfortable questions about the case, but Patterson remained a ghost. No current address, no employment records, no trace of him anywhere in the system, without concrete evidence linking him to the Morrison house that night. He remained nothing more than an intriguing theory. The jury pool looks favorable, her assistant Mark Rodriguez reported, sliding into the seat beside her. Mostly parents, several with young children. They'll relate to Emma's trauma and won't be sympathetic to excuses about memory loss and phantom intruders. Chun nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. That morning, she had received a disturbing call from Dr. Kim, Emma's therapist. The child had finally created a drawing that depicted the night of the incident, but the image was confusing and contradictory. It showed a tall, dark figure standing over a smaller figure on the ground, while another figure appeared to be protecting a tiny person in the corner. The drawing suggested both violence and protection, chaos and care. "Ma'am?" Rodriguez prompted, noticing her distraction. "I'm wondering if we're prosecuting the right person," Sean admitted quietly. "Torres has raised enough questions to make me doubt our case. What if Morrison really is innocent? Even if there was an intruder, Morrison was drunk, and Emma was injured in his care," Rodriguez reminded her. "At minimum, he's guilty of child endangerment. The jury will see this as a father who failed to protect his daughter, whether through malice or negligence." Across the courthouse, Michael Torres sat with his client's family in a small conference room. Jake's sister Maria had mortgaged her house to pay for expert witnesses, while his mother Rosa clutched a photo of Emma to her chest, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Mio was a good father," Rosa whispered in accented English. "After Linda died, he lived only for Emma. He would sing to her every night, teach her Spanish words, make her laugh when she was sad. How can they think he would hurt his little angel?" Torres felt the weight of their faith in him, but the legal realities were harsh. Even with the Patterson lead, they still faced overwhelming physical evidence and Emma's traumatic silence. His private investigator had hit dead ends at every turn. Patterson had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. Dr. Elizabeth Walsh, the neurologist Torres had hired to testify about Jake's brain injury, reviewed her notes carefully. The diffuse axonal injury from his construction accident, combined with alcohol consumption, could absolutely cause retrograde amnesia for traumatic events. She explained to the defense team, "It's not convenient memory loss. It's a documented medical condition." "Will the jury believe it?" Torres asked. "Medical evidence is compelling, but juries tend to be skeptical of anything that sounds like an excuse," Dr. Walsh replied honestly. "The prosecution will argue that selective memory loss is suspiciously convenient." Meanwhile, Emma remained in foster care with the Garcia family, who had grown deeply attached to the traumatized little girl. Mrs. Garcia reported that Emma still woke up screaming most nights, calling for her daddy through tears. During the day, she played quietly with dolls, repeatedly acting out scenarios that seemed to involve protection and danger. Detective Santos made one final visit to Emma before the trial began, bringing Bruno along as always. This time, Emma showed unusual interest in the therapy dog, gently petting his golden fur while whispering something too quiet for anyone to hear. "What did she say?" Dr. Kim asked Santos afterward. "I'm not sure, but it sounded like good dog. Helps or something similar. She keeps connecting safety with dogs, which is interesting because there were no dogs involved in the incident at her house." Dr. Kim made a note in Emma's file. Children often fixate on symbols of safety after trauma. Bruno represents protection to her something that was missing the night she was hurt. As jury selection continued, both sides faced their own challenges. The prosecution needed to convince jurors that the evidence against Jake was overwhelming despite the lack of Emma's testimony. The defense needed to create reasonable doubt about a man who remained little more than a theory. Judge Patricia Wells, a stern woman with 30 years on the bench, addressed both legal teams and chambers. "This case has generated unprecedented media attention, and I won't have my courtroom turned into a circus. Both sides will stick to the evidence, avoid inflammatory rhetoric, and remember that we're dealing with the welfare of a traumatized child." Torres seized the opportunity to make a final plea. "Your Honor, we request a delay to locate Rick Patterson, the security guard who may be the real perpetrator. My investigator has uncovered evidence that he was in the area that night." "Mr. Torres," Judge Wells replied sharply, "you've had months to locate this alleged perpetrator. The court cannot delay justice indefinitely based on speculation. Unless you have concrete evidence placing Patterson at the scene, this trial proceeds as scheduled." Chun felt no satisfaction in this victory. A part of her hoped Torres would find Patterson and exonerate Jake Morrison. But legal proceedings couldn't wait for perfect answers, and Emma deserved closure, whatever form that might take. That evening, as the legal teams prepared their final strategies, Jake Morrison sat alone in his jail cell, staring at a photograph of Emma that Maria had brought him. In the picture, Emma was laughing on a swing, her blonde curls catching sunlight, her blue eyes sparkling with joy. It was taken just 2 weeks before the incident that destroyed their lives. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he whispered to the photograph. "Daddy couldn't protect you when you needed me most. But I promise, no matter what happens at this trial, I will never stop loving you." Outside the courthouse, protesters had set up camp with conflicting messages. Some carried signs reading, "Justice for Emma," and "Protect our children," while others held banners declaring, "Free Jake Morrison," and "Find the real truth." The community was as divided as the evidence, with passionate believers on both sides. As the sun set over the courthouse dome, casting long shadows across the steps where tomorrow's drama would unfold, the truth remained as elusive as ever. Emma's silence held the key to everything, but unlock that silence seemed impossible. The trial would begin in less than 12 hours, and regardless of the verdict, lives would be forever changed. Jake Morrison would either be vindicated as a loving father wrongfully accused, or condemned as a monster who destroyed his own daughter's innocence. In her foster home across town, Emma Morrison slept fitfully, her small hands clutching a stuffed elephant named Peanut, while nightmares of shadows and safety danced through her traumatized mind. Somewhere in those dreams lay the truth that could save or damn her father. But whether that truth would ever emerge remained the greatest mystery of all. The silent angel was about to face her moment of reckoning, and with it, the fate of everyone who loved her. The courtroom was packed to capacity as Judge Patricia Wells called the case of the People versus Jake Morrison to order. Every seat in the gallery was filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and members of both families. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood floors and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the charged atmosphere. Jake Morrison sat at the defense table, wearing a borrowed suit that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost 20 pounds during his months in jail, the stress and grief having carved hollow lines into his once strong face. District Attorney Amanda Chun rose to deliver her opening statement, her black heels clicking authoritatively against the marble floor. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but as she faced the 12 jurors, 8 women and 4 men, most of them parents themselves, she felt the weight of Emma's silent suffering pressing down her shoulders. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Chun began, her voice clear and steady. This case is about the most fundamental betrayal of trust imaginable. A father who turned his hands into weapons against his own innocent child. She gestured toward a large photograph of Emma taken at the hospital, showing the little girl's bruised and battered body. Several jurors visibly winced at the image. 3-year-old Emma Morrison trusted her father completely. She depended on him for everything: food, shelter, protection, love. But on the night of October 15th, Jake Morrison violated that sacred trust in the most horrific way possible. The evidence will show that he was heavily intoxicated, that he flew into a rage, and that he physically assaulted his helpless daughter with such violence that he fractured 3 of her ribs and left her so traumatized that she hasn't spoken a word since that night. Chun moved to the evidence table, where crime scene photographs were displayed on easels. You will see the destroyed living room where this attack took place. You will hear testimony about the defendant's blood alcohol level more than twice the legal limit. You will learn about his history of alcohol abuse and violent behavior. Most importantly, you will see the medical evidence that proves beyond any doubt that Emma Morrison was the victim of deliberate, sustained physical abuse. The prosecutor's voice grew softer, more personal. Emma cannot tell you what happened that night because the trauma has stolen her voice. But her injuries speak for her. They tell a story of a little girl who was hurt by the one person in the world who was supposed to protect her. They demand justice. Chang returned to her seat, leaving the courtroom in heavy silence. The impact of her words was palpable. Several jurors were dabbing at their eyes with tissues, and the gallery was completely still except for the quiet sobbing of Jake's mother in the front row. Michael Torres rose slowly, adjusting his glasses as he approached the jury box. Where Chun had been forceful and direct, Torres appeared thoughtful and measured, his gray hair and gentle demeanor making him seem more like a favorite professor than a defense attorney. Ladies and gentlemen, Torres began quietly, forcing the jurors to lean forward to hear him. What if I told you that the real monster in this case is still walking free while an innocent father sits in jail, separated from the daughter he loves more than life itself? The prosecutor immediately objected. Your Honor, counsel is making an opening statement, not arguing facts not in evidence. Sustained, Judge Wells ruled firmly. Mr. Torres, please confine your remarks to what you intend to prove. Torres nodded respectfully. The evidence will show that Jake Morrison is not a monster, he's a victim. A victim of circumstances beyond his control, a victim of a brain injury that affected his memory, And most tragically, a victim of our justice systems rushed to find someone to blame for a terrible crime. He moved to stand directly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each juror in turn. You will learn that Jake Morrison had been sober for 43 days before that night. You will hear about his commitment to Alcoholics Anonymous, his dedication to being the best father possible after his wife's tragic death. You will discover that there had been a series of break-ins in his neighborhood by someone who knew when houses would be empty, someone who moved like a professional. Torres pulled out a photograph of the mysterious figure from the gas station security footage. This person was seen in Jake Morrison's neighborhood on the night of the incident. This person has never been identified, never been questioned, never been found. The prosecution wants you to ignore this evidence because it doesn't fit their narrative of a drunken father abusing his child. The defense attorney's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Jake Morrison suffered a severe brain injury 6 months before this incident and injury that can cause memory loss during traumatic events. The prosecution will tell you this is convenient amnesia, but medical science says otherwise. When someone with a diffuse axonal injury experiences extreme trauma while under the influence of alcohol, their brain may literally be unable to form coherent memories of the event. Torres returned to the defense table and placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. His client sat perfectly still, tears streaming down his face as he stared at his hands. The evidence will show that Jake Morrison fought to protect his daughter that night. His injuries, the destruction in his home, the pattern of blood spatter, all of it points to a struggle with an intruder, not an attack on a child. He turned back to the jury, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Emma Morrison's silence doesn't condemn her father, it protects him. Because somewhere in that traumatized little mind, she knows her daddy tried to save her. She knows he's not the monster. The real question is, will we find the courage to look for the truth, or will we take the easy path and convict an innocent man? As Torres returned to his seat, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Wells banged her gavel sharply. Order! I will have order in my courtroom. The prosecution began calling their witnesses methodically. Dr. Patricia Reeves took the stand first, her medical expertise lending credibility to every word as she described Emma's injuries in clinical detail. The X-rays were projected onto a large screen, showing the fractured ribs with stark clarity that made several jurors gasp audibly. In my professional opinion, Dr. Reeves testified, these injuries could only have been caused by deliberate, forceful violence. Someone grabbed this child hard enough to break bones and shook her with enough force to cause internal trauma. This was not an accident. Torres's cross-examination was gentle but pointed. Dr. Reeves, could these injuries have occurred if Emma fell downstairs during a struggle between two adults? It's possible, but unlikely given the pattern of, could they have occurred if someone was trying to grab her away from a protective parent? Objection, speculation, Sean called out. Sustained, Judge Wells ruled. The testimony continued with Detective Santos describing the crime scene. She presented the evidence professionally, but Torres noticed her hesitation when discussing certain details, the broken windows, the blood spatter patterns, the level of destruction that seemed excessive for a simple case of child abuse. During cross-examination, Torres pressed his advantage. Detective Santos, in your 15 years of investigating domestic violence cases, have you ever seen this level of property damage in a case involving the abuse of a 3-year-old child? Santos paused thoughtfully. No, I haven't. The destruction. Throughout the house, is it consistent with a struggle between two adults? It could be interpreted that way, yes. And the broken windows both front and back of the house, would that be unusual in a typical child abuse case? Yes, that would be unusual. Sean objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. Torres had planted seeds of doubt about the prosecution's narrative suggesting that the crime scene told a more complex story than simple child abuse. As the first day of testimony concluded, both sides knew they had scored points, but neither had delivered a knockout blow. The jurors filed out looking thoughtful and troubled, the weight of their responsibility clearly visible on their faces. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jake's family surrounded him during the brief recess before he was returned to jail. His sister Maria hugged him tightly, whispering words of encouragement, while his mother Rosa pressed a small prayer card into his hands. "Emma knows you're innocent, Mio," Rosa said through her tears. "Wherever she is, she knows her papa loves her." Jake could only nod, his voice too choked with emotion to speak. As the bailiff led him away, he caught sight of Amanda Chun watching from across the hallway. For just a moment, their eyes met, and he saw something unexpected there. Doubt. The prosecutor who was trying to convict him was beginning to question whether she was pursuing the right man. The trial was just beginning, but already the carefully constructed narratives on both sides were showing cracks. Somewhere in this city, Emma Morrison slept in her foster home, still silent, still traumatized, still holding the key to a truth that seemed increasingly elusive with each passing hour. By the fourth day of trial, the prosecution had methodically built their case like a fortress of evidence. Expert witnesses had testified about Emma's injuries. Character witnesses had described Jake's drinking problems, and the jury had seen enough crime scene photographs to fill their nightmares for years. But Michael Torres had landed enough punches during cross-examination to keep his client's hopes alive, even if those hopes hung by the thinnest of threads. The defense had presented their own experts. Neurologist Dr. Elizabeth Walsh had explained Jake's brain injury with compelling scientific authority, while character witnesses painted a picture of a devoted father struggling against impossible odds. But Torres knew that without concrete evidence of Rick Patterson's involvement or Emma's testimony, reasonable doubt might not be enough. The jury was clearly moved by Emma's suffering, and someone had to pay for it. As the morning session began, Torres made a decision that violated every principle of criminal defense strategy. He stood before Judge Wells with a request that made his own legal team blanch with horror. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to call Emma Morrison as a witness." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The gallery buzzed with shocked whispers, and District Attorney Chun shot to her feet with an objection that was lost in the commotion. Judge Wells banged her gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "Mr. Torres," Judge Wells said sternly, "are you seriously requesting that this court allow a traumatized 3-year-old child to testify in a criminal proceeding?" "I am, Your Honor. This child is the only witness to what happened that night. She's been silent for months, but recent therapy sessions suggest she may be ready to communicate. My client has the constitutional right to confront his accuser, and more importantly, Emma Morrison deserves the chance to tell her story." Chen was on her feet instantly. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. The child has been diagnosed with selective mutism related to severe trauma. Forcing her to relive that night in open court would be psychological torture. There are laws protecting child witnesses for exactly this reason." Torres had anticipated this objection. "Your Honor, I've consulted with Dr. Rachel Kim, Emma's therapist, who believes that testifying in a controlled environment might actually help Emma begin to process her trauma. We're not asking to traumatize her further. We're asking for the chance to help her heal by allowing her to speak her truth." Judge Wells rubbed her temples, clearly struggling with the unprecedented request. In 30 years on the bench, she had never faced such a dilemma. "Dr. Kim, you're present in the courtroom today. Please approach the bench." Dr. Kim rose from the gallery where she had been observing the proceedings. As she walked toward the bench, her expression was conflicted. She had spent months trying to reach Emma, and while the child had made some progress, the idea of testimony still seemed premature. "Dr. Kim," Judge Wells said quietly, "in your professional opinion, would testifying be harmful to Emma's psychological well-being?" "Your Honor, it's impossible to predict with certainty. Emma has been showing signs of increased communication. In recent weeks, she's begun playing out scenarios with dolls that suggest she's trying to process what happened. However, the courtroom environment could be overwhelming." "What if we took extraordinary precautions?" Torres interjected. "Closed courtroom, just essential personnel. Therapy dog present for support. We could even allow Emma to communicate through play therapy if direct questioning proves too difficult." Shun shook her head vigorously. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt by the defense to create sympathy for their client. They have no evidence, so they want to parade a traumatized child before the jury in hopes of emotional manipulation." "That's not true," Torres replied firmly. "If Emma testifies and confirms that my client hurt her, I'll advise him to plead guilty immediately. But if she tells the truth about what really happened that night, an innocent man goes free, and the real perpetrator can finally be caught." Judge Wells was silent for several long moments, weighing the competing interests of justice, child welfare, and legal precedent. The entire courtroom held its breath as she considered a decision that would make legal history regardless of which way she ruled. "I'm going to allow it," she finally announced, her voice heavy with the weight of the decision, "but with strict conditions. The courtroom will be cleared, except for essential personnel. The jury, counsel, court reporter, one family member for each side, and myself. Dr. Kim will be present to monitor Emma's psychological state and can stop the proceedings at any time. Detective Santos may bring her therapy dog for emotional support." Chan's face was flushed with anger and concern. "Your Honor, I respectfully request a recess to appeal this decision to the state Supreme Court." "Denied. We've delayed justice long enough in this case. If Emma Morrison can tell us what happened that night, we have an obligation to listen." 2 hours later, the courtroom had been transformed. The gallery was empty, except for Jake's sister Maria and Emma's caseworker. Soft lighting had replaced the harsh fluorescence, and a small play area had been set up near the witness stand. Detective Santos sat quietly in the back with Bruno, the golden retriever therapy dog who had become Emma's only consistent source of comfort. When Emma entered the courtroom holding Dr. Kim's hand, the change in the atmosphere was immediate and profound. The little girl looked impossibly small in her yellow dress, her blonde curls carefully brushed and held back with a butterfly clip. She clutched a stuffed elephant, the same one Dr. Kim had given her weeks earlier, and her blue eyes were wide with anxiety as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Jake Morrison saw his daughter for the first time since his arrest, and the impact nearly broke him. He started to rise from his chair, tears streaming down his face, but Torres gently placed a restraining hand on his arm. Emma's eyes found her father across the room, and for just a moment, her expression flickered with something that might have been recognition. But then she looked away, pressing closer to Dr. Kim's side. "Hello, Emma," Judge Wells said softly, her usually stern demeanor replaced by grandmotherly warmth. "Do you remember me? I'm Judge Wells. We met once before when you were very little." Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, but didn't speak. "Emma, sweetie, these are all friends here. We want to help you and your daddy, but we need you to be very brave and tell us what happened on the scary night. Can you do that?" Dr. Kim knelt beside Emma, speaking in soothing tones. "Remember what we practiced, sweetheart. You can use your words, or you can show us with the dolls, or you can draw a picture, whatever feels right to you." For several minutes, nothing happened. Emma stood frozen, overwhelmed by the attention and the memories that this formal setting was bringing back. Just when it seemed like the experiment would fail, she noticed Detective Santos in the back of the room. More specifically, she noticed Bruno. The therapy dog was sitting perfectly still, his warm brown eyes focused entirely on Emma, with the kind of unconditional acceptance that only animals could provide. Emma's grip on her stuffed elephant loosened slightly, and she took a tentative step toward the back of the courtroom. "Bruno," she whispered, her voice so quiet that the court reporter had to strain to hear it. It was the first word she had spoken in the courtroom, and its impact was electric. Detective Santos gently encouraged Bruno to approach. The dog moved slowly, careful not to frighten the fragile child. When he reached Emma, she buried her small hands in his golden fur, and, for the first time since that terrible night, seemed to find a measure of peace. Dr. Kim seized the moment. "Emma, can you tell us about the night when you got hurt? You're safe now. Bruno is here, and all these people want to help you." Emma looked around the room again, her gaze lingering on each face before finally settling on her father. Jake Morrison sat motionless, afraid that any movement might break the spell and send his daughter back into silence. "There was a bad man," Emma said suddenly, her voice small but clear in the hushed courtroom. "Not Daddy, a different man." The words hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Chun felt her case crumbling, while Torres struggled to contain his elation. But Emma wasn't finished. "Daddy tried to fight the bad man," she continued, her small voice growing stronger as she petted Bruno. "The bad man hurt Daddy and made everything broken. I was scared and hiding." Judge Wells leaned forward gently. "Emma, sweetheart, can you tell us anything else about this bad man? What did he look like?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her young mind struggling to find words for memories that had been too frightening to process. Then she looked toward the back of the courtroom, where a court security officer stood by the door. "He looked like him," she said, pointing with a small, shaking finger, but meaner. Scary mean. Every head in the courtroom turned to follow Emma's gaze toward Officer Rick Patterson, who had been working courthouse security since the trial began. Patterson's face went white as the blood drained from his features, and his hand instinctively moved toward his radio. Detective Santos was already moving, her years of police training recognizing the signs of a suspect about to bolt. But before she could reach him, Patterson made a crucial mistake instead of maintaining his innocence. He ran. Rick Patterson's desperate flight down the courthouse corridor lasted exactly 17 seconds before Detective Santos tackled him to the marble floor outside Judge Wells's courtroom. The sound of their bodies hitting the ground echoed through the building like a gunshot, followed immediately by the metallic click of handcuffs snapping into place around Patterson's wrists. "Rick Patterson, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, assault and child endangerment," Santos breathed heavily, her knee pressed firmly between Patterson's shoulder blades as he writhed beneath her. "You have the right to remain silent, though. I suspect you're going to want to talk." Inside the courtroom, Emma Morrison stood frozen beside Bruno, her small hand still buried in the therapy dog's golden fur. The chaos of Patterson's capture had frightened her, but Dr. Kim quickly knelt beside the brave little girl, shielding her from the commotion, while whispering words of comfort and reassurance. "It's okay, sweetheart," Dr. Kim said softly. "The bad man can't hurt you anymore. You were so brave to tell us about him. You helped catch him." Judge Wells had called for immediate order, but the courtroom buzzed with an energy that couldn't be contained. Jake Morrison sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his vindication hit him. His sister Maria sobbed openly in the gallery, while District Attorney Chun stared at her case files with the hollow expression of someone watching months of careful work crumble to dust. Michael Torres approached the bench with barely contained excitement. "Your Honor, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." The real perpetrator has just been identified and apprehended. Motion granted, Judge Wells replied without hesitation. Mr. Morrison, you are free to go. Bailiff, please remove his restraints immediately. As the bailiff unlocked Jake's handcuffs, the father's eyes never left his daughter. Emma had turned toward him when she heard Judge Wells say he was free. And for the first time in months, she really looked at him, not with fear or confusion, but with the pure love of a child, recognizing her protector. Daddy? Emma whispered, her voice barely audible in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Jake slowly rose from his chair, afraid that any sudden movement might break the spell. Yes, baby girl. It's Daddy. I'm here. Emma released her grip on Bruno and took one tentative step toward her father, then another. When she was halfway across the courtroom, she broke into a run, her small legs carrying her as fast as they could toward the man who had fought to protect her on that terrible night. Jake dropped to his knees just as Emma crashed into his arms, holding her tiny body against his chest with a gentleness that belied the months of anguish and separation they had endured. Father and daughter clung to each other as if they were drowning victims who had finally found solid ground. I knew you would come back, Daddy, Emma said through her tears, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I knew the good people would help you catch the bad man. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, Jake whispered into her hair. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better that night. I'm sorry you were scared, and I wasn't there when you woke up from your nightmares. But you did protect me, Emma said, pulling back to look into her father's eyes with the startling clarity that children sometimes possess. You fought the bad man, so he couldn't take me away. Bruno told me it wasn't your fault. Detective Santos, who had returned to the courtroom after securing Patterson in a holding cell, felt her heart break and heal simultaneously as she watched the reunion. Bruno had positioned himself near the father and daughter, his tail wagging slowly as if he understood the magnitude of what had just transpired. District Attorney Chun approached Jake with visible discomfort, her face flushed with embarrassment and regret. Mr. Morrison, I owe you a profound apology. The system failed you, and I was part of that failure. I promise you that we will prosecute Rick Patterson to the fullest extent of the law. Jake looked up at her while still holding Emma tightly. I don't blame you, Miss Chun. You were trying to protect Emma, just like I was. Patterson is the only one responsible for what happened to us. Judge Wells, a woman who had seen every kind of courtroom drama in her 3 decades on the bench, had to wipe tears from her eyes as she witnessed the reunion. Mr. Morrison, the court extends its sincerest apologies for the months you've spent in custody. While we cannot give you back that lost time, we can ensure that justice is finally served. As the immediate chaos subsided, the full story of Rick Patterson's crimes began to emerge. During his interrogation with Detective Santos, the former security guard confessed to a pattern of break-ins that stretched back over a year. He had used his position with Secure Home Solutions to identify vulnerable families, studying their schedules and routines before striking when houses were supposed to be empty. I never meant to hurt the kid, Patterson told Santos during his confession, his voice hollow with the weight of what he had done. I thought Morrison would be at his meeting until midnight. When I broke in and found them home, everything went wrong. The guy fought like a wild man to protect his daughter. Patterson's psychological evaluation revealed a disturbed individual who had become obsessed with what he perceived as inadequate parenting in the families he had been observing. He had convinced himself that he was rescuing children from unfit homes, though his actions suggested a more sinister motivation involving theft and violation of family sanctity. Morrison was drunk, but he was fighting to save her, Patterson continued. I had to hit him with a lamp to get him off me, and when the little girl tried to run, she fell down the stairs. I panicked and ran. I never meant for it to go that far. The confession provided closure, but it also revealed the tragic irony of the case. Jake Morrison had been telling the truth all along. His alcohol-induced memory loss had prevented him from providing a coherent account of the attack, but his instincts as a father had been intact throughout the assault. Even while heavily intoxicated and suffering a head injury, he had fought desperately to protect Emma from a dangerous intruder. Dr. Kim later explained to the court that Emma's selective mutism had been caused not just by the trauma of the attack, but by the confusion of seeing her father arrested for crimes committed by someone else. She knew her daddy had tried to save her, but she couldn't understand why everyone was saying he was the bad man. The conflict between what she knew to be true and what adults were telling her created a psychological paralysis. 3 months after the trial, Emma Morrison was thriving in her father's care. Jake had enrolled in counseling to deal with his own trauma from the false imprisonment, while Emma worked with Dr. Kim to process her experiences through continued therapy. The nightmares had largely stopped, and Emma's natural curiosity and joy were slowly returning. On a sunny afternoon in January, Jake pushed Emma on the swing set in their backyard, the same swing set where they had played countless times before their lives were turned upside down. Emma's laughter rang out across the neighborhood, a sound that had been absent for far too long. "Hiya, Daddy," she called out, her blonde curls streaming behind her as the swing carried her toward the sky. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, smiling at his daughter's fearlessness. "That's pretty high already." "I'm not scared when you're here," Emma replied with the simple confidence of a child who knew she was loved and protected. Detective Santos occasionally drove past their house during her patrol rounds, always smiling when she saw father and daughter playing together in the yard. Bruno had retired from active duty, but visited Emma regularly, their bond forged during the darkest period of her young life, serving as a bridge to healing and hope. Rick Patterson was sentenced to 15 years in prison for multiple counts of breaking and entering, assault, and child endangerment. His crimes had shattered multiple families and revealed the vulnerability that exists in every home. But they had also demonstrated the unbreakable bond between a father who would sacrifice everything to protect his child. As Emma flew through the air on her swing, suspended between earth and sky with her father's gentle push propelling her forward, she called out 2 words that had once saved an innocent man and now represented their shared future. "I'm flying." Jake Morrison caught the swing gently and pulled his daughter into a hug, knowing that while they would never forget the nightmare they had endured, they had finally found their way back to the light. Emma's voice, so long silenced by trauma now, filled their home with laughter, questions, stories, and the endless chatter of a child who felt safe enough to speak her mind. The silent angel had found her voice again, and with it, she had saved them both.